So my name's Marty Bradley. I work for a company called Leading Agile. What I do for Leading Agile is I'm a principal consultant, right? So one of the things that I do is I come in and work with the business and IT to make sure that their Agile transformation is really getting them to the point of, what people are starting to call business agility, right? And to be a little bit more specific, I help everybody tie the strategy to the execution, right? So if we ever have a COO, like a lot of times what'll happen, the reason they'll bring me in is we'll have a COO talking to IT or talking about the transformation, and the response is always, or the question is always, why is this Agile thing a black box, right? Has anybody ever heard that? Their business think Agile's a black box, right? Shouldn't be the case, right? The whole idea behind Agile is we're trying to expose everything so we can have these conversations, right? So if it's a black box to the executives, it's a problem, right? And why are we doing the Agile transformation to begin with? Is anybody in the middle of the throes of a transformation? Just one person? I'm going to assume everybody is, and nobody wants to raise their hand. So what we see is we start getting so focused on the transformation that we forget what the goal is, right? Our goal is actually, how do we increase the flow of value through the organization, right? And that may look different depending on the investment mix of the organization, right? So we may have some teams that the investment part is really to stabilize the organization, right? We have to keep the organization running, right? There's a reason we're making a lot of money. There's a reason the organization exists. Maybe their agility is every 3 months, every 6 months. Maybe it's once a year, right? Maybe you have other investments in the organization that need to chase a market, right? We need to test the market. We need to see how fast can we grow into that market. Is it a market we should be in? So we need to allocate some money for that portion of the market, right? So that portion of work that goes into the organization, right? That transformation may look different than the other transformation that you're doing, right? So the idea is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all transformation, and the best way to align that is making sure that we stay focused on why are we doing this? We're not doing it for the sake of Agile. If you're doing Agile and your business isn't changing, it's not seeing the advantage of it, then you shouldn't be doing it, right? So that's really the way we look at things. Does that make sense? So a little bit more about my background. So I've been in IT for, I hate to say this, 35 years, right? The only time I realize how old I am is when I think about how long I've been doing this or how old my kids are. So I've been in IT for like 35 years. First 15 years was mostly technical, CTO, a couple of startups. And the one thing that I learned in my startups was how to be really agile, right? Because you have to survive, right? The difference in a startup is that you have 10, 15 people that are solely focused on one thing, right? Their whole goal in life is to be successful. They may have equity. There's a lot of reasons why they want that startup to be successful. So when you say something, people listen and they analyze it and they give you feedback whether you like it or not, right? That's a healthy organization, right? So the question is, as I went into bigger and bigger organizations, how do I scale that? Because that's the biggest problem that we're running into now, right? So when I talk about developing a strategy to embrace change, I'm not talking about the typical, we're doing Agile so that we can change and pivot. What I'm talking about is how does the business, right? How do we get true business agility, right? And that's the reason we're doing this. This assumptions and ambiguity be damned, I stole that part from our chief methodologist. They have a tendency, he's a Marine. I almost said ex-Marine, but there's no such thing. So, his whole point is that we're making a lot of assumptions, right? Sometimes they get a little extreme where they're like, nobody really knows that the decision they make is right. I'm like, it's not really true, right? If you've been doing something in a business for a long time, probably pretty sure the next thing you need to do in your strategy, but it always involves a bunch of assumptions, right? And then those assumptions create ambiguity for people. So then what ends up happening is we have a lot of smart people. We're asking them, we're trying to be servant leaders. We're asking them to make decisions, but we're not really clear as to where we're trying to go. So they're left to interpret what we mean by this general statement, right? So it creates even more ambiguity, and people are making more assumptions as to what's the right thing to do, right? So the more assumptions we have, the more ambiguous things are, the more likely we're not going to hit our goals, right? You've seen this, right? So what we want to talk about today is how do we do that, right? How do we let the organization drive what we want out of the execution? If you want a copy of the deck, you can just text. There's a slide at the end. I'll show you too. But you can text and send you an email with a copy of the deck. So what does strategic planning look like today, right? I think the one term in here that people hear a lot is order taking. Do you feel like how many people are on the execution side, like the IT side, delivering solutions, right? Okay, are the rest of you business people? Okay. So have you heard from your departments that they feel like they're just taking orders from you and just trying to keep up? There's way too much demand for the capacity in the organization. They're just doing what you tell them to do, right? They're just doing it. They're assuming you're right. They're just doing it. What happens really is what's going on is that before we did the Agile Transformation, and we'll talk about there's kind of three things that we look at when we look at doing an Agile Transformation. There's the culture of the organization, there are the practices that you teach people, and then there's the system as a whole, right? So what ends up happening is when we go into organizations that have been running a specific way, probably very it's not necessarily waterfall, but it's very command and control, right? Go do this, and if you don't do this or if it breaks, somebody yells at you, right? So what do you think is going to happen when you're a new developer? You see your friends getting yelled at because they got a requirement that said, write this query, right? So my requirement is write a query? Okay. So they write the query. System comes down because the query just looks for too much data. Business yells at them because the system went down. They're like, well, I did what you told me to do, right? So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about an order-taking mentality, right? And then fire and forget, right? So we see this all the time, right? So this is really, and I'm not saying everybody in here, these kind of just general patterns that I've seen. I get there are some healthy organizations. I'll walk in a lot of times and this isn't necessarily happening. It's just they have other things they need to do to move faster. But fire and forget is really where the business says, at the beginning of the year, they've gone through their strategic planning, and they say, okay, I need you to do these 5 things, go do them. And they check every once in a while, a couple months in, development's like, hey, we're fine. We're into a quarter, we're getting some stuff done, we've delivered some things, and so we're giving everybody status, right? So the status-y stuff all feels good, and business goes away, they're all kind of just happy. But a little ignorant, right? They don't know exactly what's going on, right? And so, the effects we have are really that we're walking in and we're saying that we're being open and honest about what's going on, but that's not really what's happening, right? We have really no way, we have no language to take back to the business to help them understand that we're in trouble, or there's a risk, or that we thought this was going to work in the market, but nobody's buying it, right? So how do we start to tie all that together? So one of our executives, he loves doing this. He'll walk in to a CEO, somebody in the C-suite, and he'll pull out a napkin, right? Obviously, it's usually over drinks. And he starts drawing on the napkin, and he asks them, and this could be any question. It could be strategy, it could be culture, but he starts asking the same question. It's like in the leadership, and then he draws arrows based on the direction that they're heading, right? And typically, this is what will happen, right? We'll see a drawing like this. In order for an organization to be effective, you need this, right? I mean, it's pretty clear when you look at it this way. It makes sense. But when you go into an organization and you talk to the developers that are working on something, they have no idea what leadership wants from them. They think they do, and they'll tell you, and you're like, I was just in a meeting. That is not what they said, right? So how do we tie that together? So again, until we have a map that every employee understands, we're all pointing in the same direction, we just can't effectively do what we need to do as an organization, right? So let's start getting real, right? So I've been talking kind of in generalities and things like that. So I'm going to give you a couple of things that I've seen and a couple of patterns to kind of fix what's going on, right? So what typically we see is this, right? So we walk in and you have strategy and execution, which is fine, right? Two sides of the house, looking at things differently. So your strategy, you have very clear strategic goals, right? The business done the research, they understand what they want to do, and they have their planning, right? So what ends up happening is, in today's environment, what I see is people then they take that strategy, usually for a year, and they start breaking things down into epics, right? Everybody knows what an epic is, right? Okay. Who thinks or treats an epic like just a big user story or a container for the features? A lot of you do. Right? You may not realize it, but that's what's happening, right? So what ends up happening is you have this strategy for a year. And so you get a lot of smart people in the room, and they're talking to the business, right? Nobody's trying to make a mistake, right? Everybody's got good intentions. And so what they start doing is they start taking epics, and they know they're supposed to have some business value, but they start breaking it down, and you have some technical people in the room, right? Because you need to understand the architecture, make sure it's going to fit into the solution, and you're going to have to size it, right? Because at the beginning, everybody needs to know how big it is, because you have a certain amount of money, and you're going to plan out the year, right? You're still going to, from an Agile standpoint, the discussion is still, yeah, we're going to plan out the year, but we'll pivot if we need to, right? So everybody's on the same page, right? Everything's cool. Nobody's holding anybody to, you told me a year ago, so you all agree, right? So you're starting to understand this. So you sit down, and what you do is when you get over here, these solutions have usually all been decided, right? So you take your epics and you start breaking them down. And the reason you're spending so much time on them is you've already decided that these are the epics I'm going to do to hit that portion of the strategy. Make sense? Then you're going to take these epics and you're going to break them down to features, and you're going to hand them to the teams, and they're going to write user stories, right? So think about this, right? If you really want to pivot as an organization, what you need to be doing is you probably have a monthly operations review or whatever you call it, and you're looking at what is the work that I'm doing, and is it driving me towards the strategy that I announced at the beginning of the year, right? If your epics are broken down based on solution, what ends up happening is, in large organizations, you have dependencies, whether they're organizational or they're architectural or whatever it is. So you have these dependencies. So what ends up happening is the first couple meetings are very statusy, right? Oh, Epic 3, it's 20% done. Or we have 2 of the features out, we just deployed them, we don't have any feedback yet. So this is your monthly review. If I'm a business owner, how do I respond to that? Okay. I have really no other response, right? I can't say stop doing that because I have this other thing, but my other thing's kind of as vague as this thing, right? So now what I'm doing is I'm asking the business to make a decision. They can't. They're going to say, this is the problem we have with the term MVP, I think, is that when the business looks at this and you say, well, I could just deliver these 2 features, when they look at the solutions that have been created, they're like, but I need everything, right? I need all of that. And so the response from the business first month, okay. You get a little further down, okay. Now you're 3 months in, business starting to get nervous. You think everything's fine, but nobody has any proof that what you're doing is heading in the direction you need, right? So what ends up happening? These monthly meetings happen, you start to notice, and this is always the key that I use when I know that I'm in trouble. If I'm having a monthly meeting with the business and they stop showing up, it's because the meeting is worthless to them, right? It's not doing them any good. So like, I can get a status, just send me a report. Send me a report from version 1 or Jira and let me know what the status is, and I'll just track status like I used to, right? And that's what you'll see, right? So the business will start getting disengaged. Then we get into this conversation that business doesn't care what we're doing. And then business is like, I don't know what IT's doing. I just can't figure out what's happening, right? So let's talk about this. So I kind of went through these, right? So what ends up happening, right? We're starting to measure activities towards completion, right? Who cares, really, right? It's basically work on the shelf. It's inventory. I'm not making any money from it, right? So I don't really care about it, right? We're not measuring towards any business outcome because I don't have any yet, right? So everybody's trying to do the right thing, but I don't have any way to give me feedback as to what's going on, all right? So here's what I need to do, right? I need to start shifting my epics left. My epics should always be about business value, right? So I have a year-long solution or an idea, right? Because that's what a strategy is. It's like, I think these things will work, right? I've done my research, so let's go prove it in the market. So epics, when we come in and do a transformation, what we do is we talk to teams and ask them to try to get their epics under 3 months, right? And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get them to start to align around a quarter, right? So if I have epics that are 3 months, what are the measures I can put in that epic so that when I go to the business every month, now what I can do is if I'm putting OKRs, so objectives and key results, everybody know OKRs, right? And they're real numbers, right? And we'll go through a specific example, so it's like, make it more clear. So so in the strategy section, if you have an OKR that's talking about a year-long, like, increase profit by 10%, that's something that'd be a normal strategy thing, it's good, but as a developer or the rest of the people in my organization that are trying to help you solve that problem, that's still kind of vague, right? They have a year to solve that problem, right? So again, I still wouldn't have any kind of information. So what we want to do is we want to take these epics, we want to look and we want to extend that strategy, right? We want the epics to be built mostly with the business, right? And what are the objectives that we can break down that are going to get us towards that 10% increase in profit, right? It may not be any specific one that solves the problem, it may be a number of them, but then what we can do is we can use these OKRs to have a business conversation about how do we prioritize these things, right? If we do that, then what we do is when we move into the solutions, we have multiple epics with multiple OKRs, and we can decide which solutions we want to address, right? So in this diagram, these solutions, I'm gonna walk right off the edge. These solutions aren't all finalized, right? They could be vague. There could be some that what we want to do is we need to learn something, right? So now instead of always investing to earn, we might be investing to learn something. And that's a decision that if I go to any business guy, if I sit down and I say, hey, look, we need to do this for 2 weeks to make sure we can either de-risk this or make sure this is the right solution. We're getting ready to go into some big technology thing, and if we spend 3 months doing this, but we think we can prove it in 2 weeks, we can get some indicators that it might be a good idea, right? That's a meeting they'll show up to every day. Like literally you could have that meeting every day and they'd love to sit down and talk to you, right? And that's what you need. That's kind of engagement you want, right? So then what ends up happening is you're learning constantly, right? And you're feeding that back. And now you have a real feedback loop. This feedback loop is not about activities that you've completed, right? This is feedback to the business. And now you're starting to get to the point where the business starts to trust the system, right? Developers, IT, all the way down the line start to trust the system. Now, if I have legitimate feedback, when we talk about empowering our teams, we look at this and we start thinking about the feedback loops. Now I feel like I can say something that the business might actually understand, right? Because I'd argue that almost every group that I've gone into that has good, strong development teams, and when I say development teams, I'm really talking about system of delivery, right? So you're talking about product owners, some product managers maybe, they're usually on the business side. But they have ideas, they've been in the business, they've been working there. They have ideas of how they've seen the architecture work, right? They've looked at the competitors because when they go to develop something, it's a natural thing to do. Right? They might go look at their interface. They might go look and see what their architecture looks like, right? It's what developers do, right? Good developers actually steal code. They don't actually. So what ends up happening is you get this good feedback loop, and this is what you want, right? Because now, every month, I can make a legitimate trade-off decision, right? And that's when you're going to start seeing true agility, right? Because now the business is going to go, hey, this is going too slow. I have this other thing that's emerging in the market. I think it's going to make us more money. Let's stop working on that and let's shift to this, okay? So now there are a number of techniques. I get there are a lot of different ways to do this, but this one I think graphically is the easiest kind of walk through. So this is nothing more than an impact map, right? If you guys use impact mapping, empathy mapping, things like that from the business side. So when you look at the impact map, this is getting into more deep. This is what I was talking about. So let's say, for example, my strategy is increased profit for an air purifier division by 10%, right? So again, good strategic goal for 2020, but how do I make that more actionable? So if I then take it and I create my epics, the first one is, if I can increase sales quarter over quarter by 8%, it's probably tracking towards my goal. May not get me all the way there, but it's going to get me close. Second idea the team came up with is, hey, we also have air filters, they cost us 2 cents to make, and we sell them for $22. So if we increase those sales, then we're going to make more money. And then we could always lower the cost. We go back to manufacturing and figure out if there's a better way to make this thing and make it cheaper, right? Maybe outsource it, whatever. But now you have things that are actionable, and they're actionable in a short period of time. And the reason that's important is if you then think about this, you go over to the next thing. So let's just talk through the top one. So I want to increase my sales, by 8% quarter over quarter. So I go talk to the sales guys, right? Because they're the ones that are going to be affected, not infected. So some of the sales, they should be. So I go to my salespeople and I say, hey, well, can you do this? You're closing like 1 in 10 deals. How do I get you down to 1 in 8? And they're like, well, the problem is when we talk to the customers, they don't think they have an air quality problem, right? So a couple of people are noodling ideas, right? And so one of the developers in the room says, hey, we can create an app, right? That'll show air quality inside and outside the building, and we can give it to the salespeople. It's like, wow, that's a great idea, right? So somebody else says, how long is that app going to take? 2 months. 2 months doesn't sound bad, right? But we have a quarter. So now what's happening is because we're giving them specific time frames, they look at this and say, well, a quarter, that's kind of risky, right? So let's say everything goes perfectly and you deliver this app in 2 months. By the time we deploy it and get it to the salespeople, it's probably 2 weeks later. Now I got 2 weeks to hit my number in the quarter. Is there anything else we can do? So somebody else in the room is like, we can hire a contractor to create air quality reports. So they can just go out, use whatever tools they use. My cost is $2,000 per report. So I have a cost now. I can go and I can create a report maybe through 3 or 4 of my sales regions, right? Give it to my sales guys. So go back to the business and say, hey, look, we have a couple of ideas, but this one right here is going to cost us $15,000. We want to do this. The sales guy's like, or business guy, great idea. Let's try it. So they do that. They go out, and what are they doing? They're de-risking the solution. So they go out and they hand these reports to the sales guys, and sure enough, they start closing more deals, right? Now the app is starting to make sense. But think about what happened. In a month, I can go to my operations review specifically about this epic, say to my business people, hey, we sent this out to 3 of our sales regions, and they're closing 3 out of 8 deals instead of 2 out of 8, which is our leading indicator that this is working. We don't know if we're going to hit our 8%. We're going to try. We want to go forward with the app. App's going to cost us this much money. If I'm the business guy, the way I respond to that is, first, I want you to spend money and get the reports out to everybody else in the organization, all the salespeople, and do the app, right? So maybe he spends more money up front to get the numbers he wants, right? But now you've given options to the business, right? Now this feels agile, right? What I'd argue is this is what happens, right? So we go in, we have this thing for a year, 2020, all year. I have a discussion with our people, and our people come back and say, we're going to build an app. How long is that going to take? 2 months. Hey, we have a year. That's a great idea. Let's do that. Go build your app. Right? Is that what happens now? Right? That's what I see happening almost everywhere. So again, what happens? Every month, I go to my operations review with the business, and I'm giving them a status on where this application is. Right? 3, 4 months, app's late. Now I'm all stressed out. Now I have people injecting work, because now you get back into the old waterfall days. Remember we hit a date, we were late on a date? What would happen? We would go, okay, let's extend the date by 2 months, but we're going to jam a bunch of other stuff in there, right? That never worked, right? That's what we're doing here. That's what will happen here, right? We've seen it over and over again, right? I wish I was saying something new, so I sounded brilliant, but I'm not, right? This is what we see happen. So we need to get here, and it's not hard, right? This is really just spending a little bit more time up front. The interesting thing is at the beginning when you're doing the transformation, this feels waterfally, right? It feels like we're spending a lot of time planning, but really what's happening is that we just haven't exercised that part of our business. They haven't exercised that part of our brain, right? We're used to, like when you first go in and do a transformation, what I see a lot of times is the developers are actually more comfortable, or the development team actually more comfortable with the go do this, because that's how they were used to surviving before. So they've kind of turned their brain off a little bit, right? So they're not really building solutions for you anymore. They're doing things you probably couldn't do, right? Like who knows SQL to update a table and deploy it and all that stuff, right? That stuff's hard, right? So what I'm saying is we're just not building a system that allows the collaboration and the knowledge to be shared, right? So we have to get to that point, and this is a starting point, right? It takes more work up front because it's not just doing the impact map, it's the work to understand how to do the impact map, maybe journey mapping, and maybe getting out and talking to your customers. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this. So until you build that into a cycle of change, it feels heavy at the beginning. So just be aware of that. So when we talk about work now, what does it look like? Well, we have to feed the system, but we have to feed it with outcomes or objectives, right? What are the objectives that we're trying to achieve in the organization? And this is on the business. The business has to drive this. They have to care. They have to spend the time to figure out what are the measures that are going to help me. What is it that I'm really trying to achieve in the organization, right? If you're doing a digital transformation, right? One of the things might be, I need to get X percent of 30-year-old people, 30 and under, working in my environment. Well, that's cool, but why, right? Like, what is that? What is that why, right? Why do you need that? Is it revenue? Are you assuming if you get 2,000 under 30-year-olds, revenue is going to go up? What's the percent target, right? And challenge yourselves to do those things, right? KPIs are important, right? KPIs, you want the leading indicators because you can't always get everything in everybody's hands. Sometimes you're going to see the other problem you run into is your code isn't instrumented to give you the kind of feedback that you need, right? So you have to find ways to measure. There's a great book called Measure Anything. You can measure anything, something like that, right? But what he talks about is start measuring. Start to measure it, and then figure out what measures would be better. And then part of your discussion and part of your development when you look at system of delivery is, hey, one of the problems we have is we really can't measure the business value coming out of these features. How do we change the code, or what do we need to do to get us that information, right? So you survive off of this as you work your way back, right? But this is one of the reasons why when I hear people doing transformations, they talk about the length of the transformation. It's a fallacy, right? Agile transformation isn't something that's static, right? You're changing your operating model. You should constantly be looking at your operating model. Is it sufficient for my business, right? Remember I talked about different investment mixes? Does my operating model facilitate the investment mix that I have? If I shift my investment mix, can I shift my operating model to support it, right? Those are the business decisions. That's really what your Agile transformation is about, right? So it's always funny because, I'll talk even to my consultants. I'll ask them, I'll say, hey, look, if you walk into a transformation and they have a drop dead date that somebody gave them, maybe it's September 1st, is your job to transform them, make them agile, or is it to help them hit their date? It's to hit their date, right? I'm going to teach them as much agile as I can to get them to their date, right? And then what I'm going to do is, once we hit the date, now we'll do this as we go, but what you do then is you do the thing that Agilists should do. You retrospect, you take a look, you assess the team. What are you good at? What aren't you good at? We got to this date, but it was a death march again. Why was it a death march? Well, we didn't have a good enough backlog. Our epics were vague. Okay, good. Now I have a coaching plan, right? My coaching plan may be, I need to get product coaching on this side, right? Maybe the delivery team's awesome. Everything's fully automated. You can stand up and tear down environments left and right. You can do automated deployment. You have everything tied into Slack, so you can actually Slack approvals, right? You have the best backend system in the world, but if you're not feeding the information incorrectly, you're still just going to deliver a lot of stuff fast, but it won't necessarily be what your market needs, right? So if you're looking at this, and if you're thinking about the fact that this is an operating model, just an agile, not just an agile transformation, you realize that these are the things you're doing to support each other, right? This is a healthy, trusted system, right? When we talk about trusted systems, it's exactly what we're talking about. So, I think I covered all these. But this is what I was talking about when I say continuously embed and sustain the change. That's what we need to do, right? We may have some initial push to get teams more agile, training, things like that. But what we also need to do is you need to put a system of sustainability in place, right? How do I keep my operating model healthy? So we talk about, I'll talk about commander's intent in a minute, but this is really what I've been describing, right? Like when we go in and you talk about moving an organization to business agility, people say, well, look, you should start with culture, right? Get everybody feeling, servant leadership, get everybody feeling empowered, and that's great, right? We need that. It's absolutely important, right? Culture is important in an organization, right? If you love coming to work, if you love what you're doing, you work a lot better, right? You work harder. If you like talking to your coworkers, if you like going in and solving problems together, that's a fun environment. That to me is really what the culture is, right? A culture of change, everybody's heard. People that have intelligence and want to share get to share, right? And we move, right? Practices are kind of easy, right? The Scrum book is tiny. You can read the Scrum book in an hour and a half and get a pretty good idea what Scrum is. SAFe, the same thing, right? There's all kinds of documentation. So these practices are important, but what you really need is you need a system in place that builds the structure of how the organization needs to work. How does information flow through the system? What do I do? What are those feedbacks while I'm flowing information through the system? Because there are multiple, right? It's not always direct from here to here, right? There are multiple feedback loops that are happening all at the same time. And so how do I build that? That'll start to help my culture evolve, right? And it'll evolve as the company evolves. And if you do it that way, and then you look at the systems and you're constantly going back and looking at the sustainability of your system, you make modifications. Maybe you turn around and go, okay, this modification I need to make is really more of a cultural thing. Let's get HR involved. And if I can shift a little bit of the culture over here, it's going to help my system work a little bit better, right? But now you have a frame to make those decisions in. So we talk about commander's intent. So my son is he's a cryptolinguist in the Army. And what these guys do is they teach them cryptology and languages, foreign languages. And so he calls me one day and he says, Dad, great news, I'm getting deployed. I'm like, that sounds like horrible news, right? Like, good news is you're sitting behind a laptop and you're looking for codes in a website. That's good news, right? So anyhow, he gets deployed, and their goal is to go from, they had about a 3-mile trek they had to make from point A to point B, and they were taking supplies to some other platoon, right? And so the cryptologists, they put him on the radio. So they start heading down about a mile in, they start hearing gunfire to the left, right? And he said, he goes, Dad, I'm telling you, they train us for this and we practice. He goes, but it's nothing like when actual bullets are flying at you. He goes, it was crazy, right? So everybody runs into a building and we're all screaming at each other, right? And the commander takes charge. He says, all right, everybody shut up, shut up. He goes, all right, look, on my command, we're all gonna run right. Well, as they're doing this, Tyler's, on the radio, and they teach them how to triangulate sound. So he determines that the sound's actually coming from the gunfire is actually coming from the right. It's echoing off the buildings. So running right is not the place to go. You need to go left, right? So Tyler speaks up. He's like, look, we can't go right. We're all going to get shot. We have to go left. And so the commander looks at him and says, are you sure, Bradley? My son said it. There are a lot of other words that I can't say. So he goes, all right, but if we go left, the first person gets shot, you're going to be the second one. You're going to get shot right in the ass. So Tyler's like, no, I'm sure. So, of course, the reason I'm telling you this story is because they went left and nobody got shot, right? And so they made the right decision. So think about this story. I mean, other than the fact that my son's a badass, the point is that if you think about the Army, the way they're structured, right? So they send out this team, and it's the teams that we describe in our environments, right? Self-sustaining, right? They all have some base knowledge, right? They all know combat, they all know how to shoot a gun, they all know how to run, they all know how to do these things, right? And then they have certain decisions they're allowed to make, right? And there's a clear structure in the Army, right? Very clear. I mean, we could all probably name most of it. There's a governance model. There's a way you're allowed to make decisions, right? So think about this team. They're taking gunfire. I would have called in an airstrike, right? Let's blow them all up so I can walk safely over to here, right? But that's not my decision to make as part of the team. I have to escalate that decision, right? Because I can't see the big picture, right? I don't know if there's a hospital or a school or something like that, right? I call in an airstrike, I'm making a blind decision. So I have to escalate those things, right? It's a governance model, right? So when we talk about commander's intent, what we're talking about is put the rails around the system that allow the smart people to make the right decisions that they know they're allowed to make, right? So I'll give you another example real quick. So I was a vice president of development for the software company, and we got bought. So my CTO, so I show up one day and he's just gone. I'm like, hey, a little heads up would have been nice, because he had to know, right? So they get bought. Now I'm reporting to one of the presidents of the new division. So he walks in day one, and we had a couple products that basically did the same thing, but there was some fuzzy logic under them. So you'd feed data to this one and you get a different answer than you would this one. But in general, you're within like a 97% range. So our customers were happy if they owned one or the other. But the larger customers, if they could get a little more lift, they'd make a lot more money. So he came to me and he's very clear. He said, I need you to combine these two products. I need a 2% lift, and I need it to not run more than 10% longer than current batch windows. I think that's a pretty good, right? That's something I can work in, right? I translated it like this. Hey, you guys, you have to write an API that does, and I start describing all this stuff, and I'm making my architects crazy, right? So they go away for a couple days, and they go, this is going to take like 6 months, right? And I was told we need to do this in 90 days. So I'm like a little stressed out, right? So what did I do? I did exactly what I'm telling everybody that I coach now not to do. I'm like, you got to hit 90 days. So figure out a solution for 90 days. For 90 days. One thing that was good was I was always a very kind of open manager, and I encouraged feedback. So one of the senior developers walks in my office. He said, like, I heard what you said, but why are we doing this? And I'm like, oh, because we need, and now I told him what we wanted to do. And so he goes, oh, okay. So he leaves, and I'm thinking, there's a half hour of my life I'm never going to get back, right? So he walks out, and he comes back the next day, and he goes, hey, I just want to let you know, I can get you a 4% lift, and you barely see a nit in the batch window. And I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, so what I did was, and he described it, it was very simple. He goes, I called this, whatever things didn't pass through here, I called the other one, pass it back. From an architectural standpoint, I'm like, that's the ugliest solution I've ever heard. But he goes, yeah, but it's a packaging issue now, right? We can take product A and call product B and give it to all of our product A customers. They're going to get their lift. I can repackage product B to call product A. Did I do it the right way? And then they can get their lift, right? The upside to that is that this is a solution the customer would actually buy. Because if anybody here has an API-driven product, if you change the API on a customer, it makes them nuts, right? Like very, very, like they have long testing cycles and things like that. So they would have, even if it had been a perfect solution, they probably wouldn't have used it, right? So if I was running under commander's intent like I should have been, I would have posed this problem to them. They would have come back, and the solution, by the way, it took them 2.5 weeks, right? I was heading down a path where I was going to get fired, right? So I think I'm running late. So I'll go through this fairly quickly, but these are the things that we want to do, right? So we want to change the conditions for success. So we want to change from authority, from a command directive to command by intent, right? So let everybody know what our intentions are. I would suggest too, having a monthly or a quarterly strategy meeting with your whole team is probably a good idea, right? Let them hear from the business exactly what it is they're trying to do. What are they hearing from their customers, right? People get excited about these meetings. I know they're a pain in the butt to set up, but they're helpful, right? Sometimes, like what I hear about, like in SAFE, they have that all hands PI training every 90 days. The one good thing about that is it forces the business to come in and talk about everything they want to do. That's 90% of the reason why that meeting's usually successful, right? So they're good meetings to have. Outputs, you want to move towards outcomes, right? So what are the business outcomes I want to have, right? Not what are the things I want to produce, right? Not go create this application, go do this, go do this, go do this. Business outcome, I want to increase sales quarter over quarter by 8%. Go figure it out, right? Give me feedback, because you can't go away for 4 months, right? The teams have to be held accountable. Everybody up and down the stream has to be held accountable. And I'd argue that they'd love to be accountable to this. They don't want to be accountable to you telling them what to do and giving them a date, right? Because it's an impossible task, right? When you do that to people that are doing work, they have no choice but to do their own prioritization. You leave them no choice, because otherwise they're not doing their job, right? And people come to work to do their job, right? So if I say do these 10 things and they know there's no way they're getting all 10 done, they're going to decide which 5 they can get done. And they're probably not going to be the 5 that the business wants, right? So focus on the outcomes and let the teams decide. And then focus on discovery instead of predicting, right? We know more than likely we're not correct, right? Not saying we're never correct, but more than likely we need to learn information, right? So build a system that can discover on a regular basis, right? You may throw them out, you may keep going, but you need to be able to make that decision. So build your system. Your systems need to be built like this. And if that means you have to change the way you're building your technology, if that means you have to change your architecture, then that's what you have to do. So frequent feedback, right? I keep saying this, but everybody gets it, right? And so now you get to the point where all the employees can make decisions, right? Because we're going to make the right decisions given our bounds, given our guardrails, right? So now we can decide, we can do the thing. And I'm telling you, teams that work like that, okay, teams that work like that are successful. They're happy. Every transformation that we've gotten to this point, the developers go to their manager and say, I have never had so much fun in my job than I have in the last 3 months, right? When your teams and your people that work for you are telling you those things, that's a good day, right? You know you're doing something right. I won't get into this, but so basically this is in the system and on the system, right? This goes to the operating model is continuous. So you're always doing something in the system, right? I'm trying to get work through the system. So I'm building an epic feature, developing something, I have feedback loop, but then on the system too, right? You have to constantly be looking at, you have to train your teams to coach the system, right? A typical thing that we see is everything will start working okay, and then all of a sudden you have delivery teams that just can't hit a date. All of a sudden, everything was fine, then all of a sudden things get all out of whack. When you go talk to the team, you start to find out that somebody's injecting work at the side of the system, right? So we have to give people a way to not say no, because I'd argue that no is never the right answer, right? Not just because it's politically correct to say it. I don't know if that thing coming in on the side is good or not. I need to get it to the people that understand if it's good or not. And then have them have the conversation with the person that's injecting it to say, hey, look, we have this system in place, and this is how we evaluate our options. What you said, yeah, we should do that, and I'm going to go figure out how to do it. Or, no, we shouldn't do that, and this is why, right? You see this a lot in like kind of mid-level startups. Well, I mean, I see it everywhere, but mid-level, like this happened. I was at a healthcare company. Everybody was freaking out because the biggest customer wanted something, and everybody stopped, dropped, and rolled and started to do it. And another project was getting behind, so the CEO said, hey, what's the problem? They said, well, this big customer that you brought in said they were going to leave us if we didn't do this thing. And he's standing in the hallway, and he said, they're never going anywhere. Stop doing that. Go do this, right? So when the information gets to the right people, it helps align the organization. So here we are, right? We're changing faster. Problems are harder to solve, but we got to be able to move, right? We have no choice. Right? I'm working in some organizations that if they don't do this right, they won't be in business in a year. You know, you can go through all the old examples, TWA and all those people, right? They try to do the same thing they did before, a little bit better, a little bit faster, but that's not always the answer, right? Maybe new emerging markets you have to get to. So you have to figure that out, and you have to be able to feed it back into the system. So this is it, right? So we care about our markets, customers, and the problems they have, and how do we solve their problem, and how do we charge them for that? And then our organization's got to have the capacity to make those changes, right? So if we take our investment mix and we lay it across our operating model, they should match. All right, well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.